Continuing with Lama Yeshe Losal Rinpoche's From a Mountain in Tibet, page 35. Akam Rinpoche set me to study right after my arrival, and sure enough, my father's words about the severity of the program proved to be correct. My brother had just finished a lengthy period of study at the monastery in Sechen with the highly esteemed Jamgyong Kongtrul Rinpoche, and he had returned full of inspiration to run Doma Lakan in a very tough and vigorous way. He was only 16 years old, yet he was in charge of a monastery with 300 monks, as well as 4 affiliate nunneries, one at each corner of the base of Kula Mountain, that housed many hundreds of nuns. He never appeared ruffled by all this responsibility, despite his inexperience. He had been born to do this role, and he and everyone else accepted this. I marvel now at this equanimity, because in addition to the period of study, Akon had also witnessed evidence that our whole way of life was in danger. From Sechen he had traveled with his great friend, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, another young Lama of the Kagyu school, to Palpong Monastery. They had been summoned to hear His Holiness the 16th Karmapa give an account of Dalai Lama's recent trip to China. His Holiness the Karmapa, flanked by communist officials, recounted that the Dalai Lama had been warmly received. He explained that His Holiness the Dalai Lama had been informed of all the material progress being achieved in China and Tibet. Reports were passed on of new roads, shops, clinics, and schools. But Akon heard no mention of the people's religious and political freedom. Clearly, His Holiness could not express his opinions, or His Holiness the Dalai Lama's, since his every word was being monitored by Chinese officials. But, reading between the lines, it was plain that the regime was growing ever more hostile to our Buddhist way of life. A month later, Akon had been present at the Dalai Lama's brief personal visit to the monastery of Derje Gonchen, but the general pleasure at hosting His Holiness was curtailed almost immediately, when he was hurried away by communist officials after a mere 2 hours. When Akon Rinpoche finally arrived back at Doma Lakan, he came carrying a heavy burden of concern, as well as renewed zeal. It wasn't until much later that I became aware of the crisis. I can only feel admiration for the fact that my brother, like so many other lamas, was able to maintain the communal life of spiritual practice in the face of such severe pressure. He may have been able to contain his concerns, but he certainly didn't hide his determination to give as many of the Buddha's precious teachings as possible, not only to me, but to other members of the community. He was to be my personal tutor, except when monastery business, study, or visits to laity of the surrounding areas claimed his attention. He drove me relentlessly and beat me when I was particularly obtuse or careless. He was never cruel. It was simply that this was custom in those days, especially in the monasteries. He wanted to give me the best possible education so that I could eventually serve as his second in command. Now I also wonder whether some of his implacability was in response to the escalating threat he had to contend with during these years. With him, there was no possibility of escape, as there had been with my father. We began our studies the moment there was daylight enough to see the lines on the palm of my hand. The first objective was to master the Tibetan alphabet. You can be sure that I regretted my former laziness when my brother, amazed that I had not even learned the basics, made me repeat each letter over and over again until I could pronounce it perfectly. The oral practice of learning was the foundation for recognizing and reading the letters in texts, and eventually replicating them in my own hand. But I was incapable of clearing even this first hurdle. My throat was permanently sore, and my voice grew hoarser and hoarser, until I couldn't even croak out a sound. In the end, my brother called in a doctor to treat me. These days his methods would be regarded as positively medieval, as much in Tibet as here in the West. The doctor rolled up my tongue and cut the skin beneath it, which attaches the tongue to the roof of the mouth. It was a blood-letting exercise, and of course my mouth did indeed fill with blood. The procedure was repeated 3 or 4 times. On one occasion I thought I would choke on my own blood. Naturally, this treatment, instigated by Akhen Rinpoche, did nothing to lessen my resentment towards him. When my brother was away or busy, he handed my care over to Jamyang, and my teaching over the retreat master in charge of the 3-year retreat. Then life was much more bearable. My interactions with the retreat master, who was a kind man, were far less charged than they were with Akhen Rinpoche. The regime was still tough, mind you. There were no more tongue cuttings, but the hours were long and the demands endless. Gradually I began to learn to read and write. By the time I left the monastery, I could read the prayers aloud very fast, though nothing was ever enough for Akhen Rinpoche. The retreat master's principal duty was much more rewarding task of teaching the cream of the monastery's crop. The retreatants were those monks who had shown exceptional aptitude for the study of Buddhist texts and who had been selected to undergo the long retreat that would prepare them to become lamas. These retreats, traditionally lasting 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, are unique to Tibetan Buddhism. They were cloistered, so retreatants had no contact with anyone from the outside world except for teachers and attendants, and unfortunate creatures like me, who happened to be the brother of the Tulku. I gained my first real insight into a way of life that would eventually be my own by observing life in the retreat house. The regime was very strict and intense. The monks rose before 4 a.m. and practiced in isolation throughout the day, apart from some group pujas, prayer rituals, until they retired to sleep around 10 p.m. Rather than a bed, the retreatants slept in a meditation box in which they sat cross-legged. The idea was that they continue to sit in meditation posture and maintain some level of awareness even as they slept. In later life, I engaged willingly, joyfully actually, in long periods of solitary retreat, though by that stage I had turned my mind around and was committed to the path of enlightenment. But as a young boy of 13 or so, being in the retreat house merely reinforced my sense that I was being tortured and incarcerated. Throughout my time at Dolma Lakan, all I could think about was escape. But where would I go? It wasn't like being in Darak, where I knew the surroundings intimately, where everyone was either a playmate or a trusted family friend. I couldn't exactly slip out to play in the woods or down at the stream with my sisters. There were no woods, and there were no friends or sisters. There wasn't even a village beyond the monastery walls, only freezing desert. The people who lived close by the monastery were nomads who moved around with their animals. Only a small group of them remained during the winter months, in stone houses built into the shelter of the mountainside. Those who stayed tended to be younger men. There were no families with young children. I missed being outside during the summer months. I missed herding our animals and sleeping out under the stars or on our veranda. Up here, the summer could come and go in scarcely more than a week. My only real contact with another child occurred periodically, when the family of the first Akon came to visit with their 12-year-old son. For the few days of those visits we played all over the Lhadron, and I felt like a normal boy again. My loneliness when they left was always much more intense. I missed my mother even more than usual. I bitterly resented my studies. There weren't even any views for me to stare at as I worked, because the windows, sealed in thick, opaque paper, stretched over a lattice, were set high up in the walls above my head. I felt I had lost everything and everyone I loved. It was Jamyang who lifted my spirits when I was downcast. Every day I would go to him for comfort, and he was always there with a smile and a hug. He tried to intervene when Akhen Rinpoche punished me. He would shield me with his body. But he was in awe of Akhen Rinpoche too, of course. I remember him begging me to be more focused when Akhen was away. and he was left in charge of my welfare. "Come and study just a little more," Jamyang would say to me, almost bleating. But at those times I wanted to forget about study. I would leap around him like a puppy, wanting to run and jump and wrestle him to the floor. He indulged me, and we laughed and played together. When I had been in Dolmalakan for about 2 years, the first report reached us that the Chinese People's Liberation Army had attacked a monastery. I knew that there had already been uprisings against the increasingly authoritarian communist presence. This armed resistance was met by ever more aggression from the Chinese military. I had been shielded from most of the discussion of what was going on all over our country, but now I couldn't help overhearing fragments of conversations between my brother and his advisors. Continuing our conversation with page 35 of From a Mountain in Tibet.
Right, well, compared to the retreats in the West, they appear to be quite watered down to the ones that Lama Yeshe was talking about.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there were a certain amount of strictness, but it wasn't as strict as that. Nobody ever got beaten up or anything like that.
Right.
No, that never happened. It was very much watered down compared to that, you know. We did the long hours, of course, but anyway. But there was a difference, you know. And I see Akko Rinpoche was brought up that way, very, very strict, but he wouldn't see that as being cruel, because of the way he was trained and brought up, so he just passed on his training techniques to Lama Yeshe.
Yes.
So that's what.
So you think that he was treated in the same way when he was getting trained up?
Yeah, aye, yeah.
It was part of the program, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, Rinpoche went through all that himself, I'm sure. He did get it very, very easy, you know.
They're trying to burst the ego, right?
That's what it's about, yeah. Bursting the ego. Yes.
And to change the fixedness we have about who we think we are.
That's right.
Shatter the solidity.
That's right.
It's difficult to hear that that's part of the spiritual path, because a lot of people would like the spiritual path did not have any hardships on it whatsoever.
A lot of people who set out in the spiritual path start off thinking it's going to be nicey, but it's nothing like that at all. And when they do, even in retreats, you know, a lot of the mind poisons comes up to the surface, and it gets very heavy. They find it hard to work with, and a lot of them usually come out of the retreat because it was too much for them, because they weren't prepared or ready. We never had only preparation they had was studying, but never had any toughness along with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
The physical and the emotional side of it are quite powerful, aren't they?
That's right, yeah.
And even the natural light was brought into the room very, very high up, so
yeah.
A person wouldn't be distracted by the outside world in any way whatsoever.
Yeah. So I can see it was good that Lama Yeshe got some Namjal there to give him the other.
His brother.
Yeah, a lighter side of the program, you know. It's good we're able to play and have some fun. That's part of it. But I always say, oh, work and no play doesn't work.
That's right.
Oh, work and no play doesn't work.
He had a balance between the two brothers, didn't he?
That's right.
And they probably were in quite good communication with each other to see how he was holding up.
That's right, yeah.
He would be pushed to the edge, wouldn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Pushed to the very edge and kept going, aye. It's like that, you know. But anyway, It used to be like that in the West, you know, way back in the olden times. If you didn't learn, you got punished, cane, and you got punished if you didn't learn anything. It was like that too in the West.
Yes.
Way back. But no, in modern times it was more different, of course.
Yes. Well, they've discovered it doesn't always work, does it?
No.
To use the harsh treatment.
No. Well, the mothers didn't agree with the harsh treatment, did they?
No. Some individuals will respond if they're treated with gentleness, and some individuals need to have the harsh treatment.
Yeah.
It's a difficult judgment call, and you always have to be careful, don't you, when you're trying to strike that balance.
Maybe you get some hard, difficult people, it's the right method for them, you know, to get trained that way.
If they're not able to respond, if it's more gentle.
Yeah. So we've got to buck them up a bit, you know.
Yes. So I suppose you could say that in a retreat setting, the challenges come in whatever way they will be challenging for the person. So if it would be challenging to have it come as physical, it will come as physical.
Yeah.
Challenging for it to come as emotional, will come as emotional.
Yes.
And
right.
each of the poisons, it will be just that combination that would bring out all those things that need to be purified for the person.
Yeah. And probably one of the good things you say about it, it made them learn, because if they didn't learn, they're going to get punished. That made them really
motivation.
Motivate to learn. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's difficult for us Westerners to hear that without becoming judgmental or being horrified.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. Yes.
And the training has had to adjust when the people in the retreat are Westerners.
That's right. Yeah. They had to water it down. Yes, definitely. And even at that, when watered down, a lot of them, some people couldn't hack it.
It's not for everyone, is it?
No, it's not for everybody.
And quite amazing that Lama Yeshe Rinpoche said that not only was he having all these difficulties at that age, but then later he actually chooses to go back into some of these same conditions, and not only chooses, but does so joyfully.
Yeah. Well,
it shows that when the mind is turned to the Dharma and there's the proper training, that seeming obstacles can be transformed.
We remember he done it as a solitary retreat. So the actual whip was handed over to himself.
Yes, that's right.
So nobody had to whip him to make him study. He had to whip himself.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting in the story that we're being drawn into his account, and at the same time we're very aware that in the story something is happening to all Tibetan people, and that the outside world is collapsing in on them in a way that they had not anticipated or been prepared for, and a kind of cruelty for which there was no kindness.
That's right, yeah. But however, at least you can say one thing, they survived.
This is it.
They survived.
And the story is about that. The story is not just about the challenges and the difficulties, but the triumphs.
Yeah.
And how it all can be transformed.
Yes. But I notice when the lamas and teachers come to the West, they don't deliver that same harshness as they experienced in their monasteries.
Yes.
Yes.
Less finger pointing.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the way it was, you know.
Yes.
Okay.